Andrew, are we starting?
We're going to start, yeah.
Hi, everyone. I hope it is not too raucous where I am, and you can hear me, because I am currently at one of the Masa's prestigious gap year programs, the Nativ gap year program, which I am an alumnus of, which I teach here on Wednesday nights. And I just finished up my class right now, and now coming for you here to host this fine occasion. So this is a part of our series of mifkashim, of meetings, where we're discussing some issues that are relevant to this current moment in Israel, especially pertaining to the conflict between Israel and Hamas and repercussions of it for Israeli society and Jewish world. And these sessions have been brought to you by the Israel Education Team and the Masa Impact and Leadership Center, which Andrew is proudly representing this evening, my former and you could say even current colleague in some capacity. And so tonight or today, wherever you're calling in from, my colleague Matthew Lipman, I don't know if anyone can read his Zoom bio there, but he wrote his very British English name, Matthew Lipman in Hebrew.
There should be a chubchik there, but they don't have it in Zoom. So
Matthew, where's the chubchik?
By the tough.
Interesting. Matthew. But don't you? Like, this is if you put the dot in the middle, isn't that okay? Anyway, the insider conversation. So Matthew is going to be leading us in a conversation today. We wanted, I'm not sure let Matthew. He'll introduce what we're doing because Matthew and I discussed, especially anticipating a more intimate crowd, if we can have it actually be more discussion based. And so we wanted to, I think, invite everyone who's comfortable to, if you want to share a camera for a little bit at least, or if we can have a discussion based, that some of that engagement, if we'd like to have it person to person, or we'll use the chat box. But anyway, I'm gonna pass it on to you, Matthew, to introduce yourself and what the next little bit less than an hour of what everyone's life here on planet Earth will be like here on the Zoom conversation.
All right, thank you, Benji, for the introduction. Thank you, Andrew, as well, for hosting us this evening, and of course, thank you to all of you for joining us this evening. As Benji alluded to, I'm from England originally. You may have been able to tell. I don't know if we have anyone else here on this call from the King's Great Kingdom, but I now reside in Israel. I live in Modi'in, and I teach on a number of the Masa Gap Year programs. And if anybody is in the Masa emoji, well, it was emoji before the war, but now the Masa news update group. I don't know if any of you are in that. We have over 800 Masa fellows in there, so some of you may be in there. That's me. I'm the one that sends you those messages. So I hope you find them useful, and I hope you find them interesting. And I'm always looking for feedback if you have feedback about this. So tonight what we're going to be talking about is I want to give a little bit of background to what's happening, right, in terms of the war that we're currently experiencing here in Israel. And then after that, I want to throw out, I guess it's almost like a moral dilemma, an ethical dilemma to all of us to discuss together. And of course, I'm referring to the ceasefire deal, which was agreed by the Israeli cabinet last night. Before we get to that, I just want to give a little bit of background to you. I'm going to share my screen now. And then we're going to open up the conversation to, did the cabinet do the right thing? And we're going to talk about that in a couple of minutes. So let me share my screen with you all, just to give some background. As Benji mentioned, also, if you have any comments or questions, either feel free to use the what do you call it, the reactions button, right, to raise your hand, or you can put into the chat. And Andrew's going to moderate for us the chat, so thank you in advance to Andrew for doing that. Okay, so just to give background, because I'm guessing many of you are familiar with some of this information. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same sort of page before we get into some of the more analytical piece of it. This is a map of the state of Israel, right? As Masa fellows, alumni, etc. I'm sure you've all seen this map many times and are familiar with it. So this is a map of the modern state of Israel. You'll notice, of course, that the West Bank is over here. If you can see my, where's the, I'd like to, I want to put the flashlight feature on. Let's see if we can do that. Okay, it's not letting me do it. So, okay, but all right, I can't find it now, but I want to show you that this is where, I hope you can see the cursor at least, that the West Bank is over here and the Gaza Strip, which is, of course, obviously famous right now with everything that's going on. That is on the west coast of Israel. And Israel has a border with Gaza over here. Gaza also backs on to the ocean. I don't know what you call it, is ocean facing. There's also a border by the Rafah crossing, which you may have heard a lot about in the news recently, which is the border with Egypt. And this is what we're talking about. Tonight, we're going to basically be talking about what happened over here, is happening right now in Gaza, and of course, in what is referred to as Otef Gaza, which is this strip of land around around Gaza. Okay. Judea and Samaria, we mentioned the West Bank is on the east side of the country, and the Gaza Strip is on the west side of the country. And then the envelope, which is what I was referring to before, what we call in Hebrew Otef Aza, is over here. Now, for those of you who've experienced, I don't know where everybody's calling in from now, but those of you who've experienced the sirens when rockets are fired from Gaza, depending where you are, you have different amounts of time to go into your protected room. Obviously, the closer you are, so if you're in a place sort of like the Sderot or somewhere much over here within the 10 kilometers, then you have much less time than if you're somewhere like where I live in Modi'in, which is over here, right? So it really depends. But what happened on October 7th was there was major attacks onto the Otef, right? And into the Otef area. We'll talk about this in a minute. Just to give a context of the recent history of Gaza, you'll see the first map that I want to show you is over here, okay? This is a map of what the Partition Plan of 1947 that was presented to the United Nations, passed by the United Nations. This map shows in the pink areas and also the green. So the pink and the green areas are the areas that were assigned or were going to be assigned for the Arabs. And the blue is the bits that the Jews were going to get, right? So you'll notice that the Jews were going to get a very large chunk of desert, which was not something that they ideally wanted, but Ben-Gurion said, listen, it's something, it's a foothold, we'll take it, we'll accept it, even though it's not ideal. But the Arabs rejected the plan. They rejected the partition plan. That's a conversation probably for another occasion. So the next time Andrew and Benji organize a series, maybe they'll invite me to come and talk about the partition plan and why that was rejected. But what you can see now is the pink areas are the areas which, although they originally assigned to the Arabs, once the Arabs rejected the plan, a civil war broke out at the end of 1947 until 1948. And in May of 1948, we had the War of Independence. That war lasted until July of 1949. By the end of the War of July of 1949, Israel had captured the pink areas as well. So they now had the pink and the blue, and they were allowed to keep all of that. That is what we would call, or some people would call Israel proper, pre-67 Israel. The green, as we mentioned before, the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, depending what you want to call it, that was now from 1949 to 1967 under Jordanian control. And the green on the west side of the country, the Gaza Strip, that was now under Egyptian control. Okay, so you'll see that I've put that here in the bullet points, right? It was assigned to proposed for the Arabs in 1947, 49 to 67, it was under Egyptian control. Okay, in 1967, we have the Six-Day War, at which point Israel, as well as capturing the Sinai Desert, the West Bank, the Golan Heights, they also captured Gaza. right? So between 1967 and 2005, it was under Israeli control, the Gaza Strip. That also included, though, the Palestinian Authority came in partially. It's a very weird sort of dynamic and very complicated, but Israel maintained a lot of military control in the Gaza Strip, even after 1993, after the Oslo Accords, after the Palestinian Authority came in. But they had this security control, and they maintained about 20 settlements, 20 Jewish settlements, Israeli settlements, known as the area of Gush Katif. So because these settlements were there, there had to be a defense mechanism for them. There had to be the army, right? So the army were there, and the army were controlling very significant parts of Gaza, but also qualitatively were involved very much in what was happening in Gaza. And then the prime minister at the time, Ariel Sharon, decided that Israel should withdraw entirely from the Gaza Strip. When he did that, it caused a big split in Israeli society. Many people felt that Ariel Sharon, who himself had been the father of the settler movement, as he was described, had basically let people down. They said, "This is crazy. What are you doing?" He said, "It's good for the country that we're not there anymore. It's not good for us. It's not good for the Palestinians. It's time to come out." So the disengagement, which I'm sure many of you have heard about, that was in 2005. And when Israel left in 2005, they basically pulled out the 20 settlements, the 20 plus settlements that were there, all the people. There was about 10,000. There was about 10,000 Jews living there at the time. They were pulled out. They were resettled in other places. It took many, many years for them to find communities and housing and jobs and things like that. It was a very, very difficult time in Israeli history. Whether you think that the disengagement was a good idea or a bad idea, anybody who saw the images of Israeli soldiers pulling Jews out of their own homes, that was very hard, right? It was very hard, whether you think it was justified or not. But everyone agreed it was a very difficult period in history. And Israel left Gaza, basically locked the gate and said, "This is your problem now. You deal with this." Okay, there was no negotiation. There was no what's the word? There was no negotiation. There was also no, "We'll give you this and you'll give me that in exchange." There was nothing like that. Israel left, and they said, "Okay, now you deal with it." And they left it under the Palestinian Authority control. In 2006, there was an election in Gaza. And Hamas basically they won that election, and since 2007 they also kicked Fatah out, which is the other like sort of major Palestinian political party. They kicked them out in a very, very brutal, vicious way, like really seriously violent and bad, and kicked them out. And since 2007, the Gaza Strip has been under Hamas control. Right now, Israel, as you'll see on the map, which I have over here for you, you'll see Israel does have border points with Gaza. Israel maintains controls the airspace over Gaza, also controls the waters around Gaza. When things are quieter, the blockade is much further out, so that fishermen, etc., can do the things they want to do. And when there's difficult times, which there have been several times over the last almost 20 years, then it gets brought closer in to prevent smuggling and importing of weapons and dangerous materials like that. But you'll see on the map over here, this shows you that Israel does have a couple of border crossings with Gaza. As recently as just a few days before October 7th, there were many thousands of Gazans that were crossing in every day into Israel. They had work permits to come into Israel through those crossings. That's obviously something which has been suspended for now and is unlikely for the foreseeable future to be reinstated. And as I mentioned earlier, there's also a border with Egypt. When Israel was when this war started and people were campaigning that there should be humanitarian aid, the humanitarian aid went in through the crossing with Egypt, with the Rafah crossing. Egypt said, "We'll let goods in. We are absolutely not letting anybody out. We don't want to have a refugee situation in Egypt." And that also created a tension in the dynamic, which we're going to talk about shortly. Okay. Are there any comments or questions so far? No? Okay. So we'll move on. And if people, please, and if people do have comments, questions, thoughts, anything like that, please, please, please share. I know it's a lot of information. My understanding was some of this is new, some of this is not new, right? So I'm just trying to get to the meat of what we want to do. This is where the war started, okay, was on October 7th. You'll see there the images of the fence being broken down, terrorists breaking over the fence, storming Israeli military positions. That morning of October 7th was the morning of Simchat Torah, which is a Jewish holiday, a Jewish happy day. It was a crazy time in Israel. Where I live in Modi'in, we get a lot of, we don't get so many sirens, but we get a lot of the booms, the very loud booms, whenever there's rockets fired towards Rishon LeZion or towards Tel Aviv or Rehovot, we get the booms from the Iron Dome batteries. And that morning, I heard some booms. I thought, oh, it must be my kids messing around with the doors and banging the doors and shutting each other out of their rooms and things like that. And it was only when I was walking to synagogue with my daughter that we were like, oh my God, there's something crazy going on. And so much we didn't know that I'd sent my 10-year-old to walk to synagogue by himself, which I wouldn't have done if I would have known that was it. But there was this crazy barrage of rockets that morning, crazy, crazy, crazy barrage of rockets. And unfortunately, we now know that thousands of Hamas terrorists infiltrated into Israel. They captured a whole series of kibbutzim, moshavim, broke into towns. We know, of course, unfortunately, that they broke into the party that was happening near Ofakim. We know that they broke into that party. We know that they broke into people's homes in the kibbutzim and the moshavim in the areas. Terrible, terrible things that they were doing. And as we know now, hundreds of hostages were taken. The numbers have been adjusted since that day, since October the 7th, because there were some people they thought were taken captive, and unfortunately they found that they'd been killed, and there were some people they thought had been killed that they discovered had been taken captive. But this is an unprecedented situation in Israeli history when you have people literally being taken out of their homes in what we would call Israel proper, right? This has nothing to do with settlements. This was Israel proper. People were taken from their homes, and as I'm sure you've all been following, it wasn't just soldiers, right? There were soldiers as well, unfortunately, but of course, we now know that there were many children, the elderly, women, right? Completely innocent civilians who were taken, and they were taken into Gaza. And the stories we're hearing about those being taken captive are really crazy stories, and very unfortunate. And the families of those hostages have been campaigning now rigorously, or vigorously, I'm not sure which word it is, but for the last almost 2 months now, been campaigning very, very strongly on the international stage, speaking at the UN, speaking at international rallies, speaking outside Downing Street, which is the British equivalent of the White House, meeting with members of Knesset, speaking to the press, speaking to the media, launching very powerful social media campaigns. Every town and city in Israel now has some kind of monument to these people, some kind of exhibit or display, either of the pictures of the faces of the people, or where I live in Modi'in, for example, there's a very long street, and it's been placed, 240 chairs have been placed there along the street, which is really like very, very jarring when you drive past it and you see it. And there's like high chairs there to represent the babies, and little chairs to represent the children, and a wheelchair to represent the elderly. Every city and town now in Israel has similar displays. You may have seen the Tel Aviv Museum of Art did the Shabbat table, which has been replicated in other countries around the world, where they basically set a table for 240 spots and put place settings there. So the hostages have become a very important part of this, and that's what we're going to talk about in a minute. I'll just tell you a personal anecdote as well, by the way, is because, like I said, I live in Modi'in, and from last week, the families of the hostages, they did a march. They marched from Tel Aviv to Yerushalayim. By the time they got to Yerushalayim to go and meet with members of the Knesset, about 30,000 people had joined them on this march. So it was a very significant amount of people. It looked crazy on the streets. So where I live in Modi'in, unfortunately, there was a family of one of the hostages who was pronounced dead, and she was a soldier, and her family was sitting shiva for her in a house of mourning in Modi'in. And so they took a detour on their procession, and they came into Modi'in, the families of the hostages, and they asked people to line the street where they were walking with their flags. So we went with the flags, and we're standing there, and as the families come in, I mean, they're literally like 3 feet from where I was standing, the families, and it was heartbreaking. Like really, I cannot describe to you how horrific it was and how heartbreaking it was to see how distraught these people were, and to know that they had no idea what was happening to their loved ones. So it's become a very important piece of this. Israel declared a war. Reservists, something like 300,000 reservists were called up. And this is what the operation is being called, the Swords of Iron, okay? 2 major goals for Swords of Iron. Number 1 is to the destruction of Hamas, and number 2 is to release the hostages. The image I've put on the left was after Golani soldiers, they captured the parliament building in Gaza, and they were taking picture with the Israeli flag and with the flag of their unit. And the idea was, they were saying, we're here. We've got rid of Hamas on their political control. I mean, the political leadership of Hamas lives in Qatar, so they're going to be a little bit harder to get to. But the idea is Hamas is no longer in control. That was the statement they were making. Now it's not in reality yet, right? Hamas is still active, very active. But Israel's stated goal is to destroy Hamas. Quite what that looks like is we're still not sure. They've talked about destroying the leadership. They've talked about killing all the leaders. That is certainly easier said than done. The senior leadership in Gaza, of course, are in, as far as we know, they're hiding in their tunnels, in their tunnel network, and it's going to be hard to get to them. And the senior political leadership is in Qatar, and that's also going to be very hard for Israel to get to. But that's one of the stated goals. And the other stated goal is to release the hostages. You see here an image from the Bring Them Home campaign, and you can see the pictures. I hope you could see them on your screens, but you'll see the people who are involved here. We see all ages, right? Children, the elderly, soldiers, women, parents, right? Teens, every kind of age imaginable. In the time since the campaign started, or since the war started, there's been a couple of hostages who have been released. There were 2 elderly women that were released. There were 2 dual citizens who were released, and there was also 1 soldier who was rescued by the IDF. Unfortunately, there's been a couple of cases now where they've found bodies of hostages, and now there's still like 240 people there, and that's become a central focus of the campaign, of the military campaign, is to bring the hostages home. It's also a central focus of what this war is about now. On the one hand, yes, people want to destroy Hamas. People recognizing that definition and quite what that means is going to be really hard to do. And something that's very, very tangible is to have children sleeping in their own beds again, to have families reunited again, to have people together again. That's very tangible. So that's what we're going to sort of be talking about, okay? A deal was agreed. So you may have heard about this. A deal was agreed. It was brokered by Qatar, which is ironic, and we're not going to get into it now, but it's ironic because Qatar have been funding Hamas for a long time. But the deal was brokered by Qatar, the Egyptians, and the Americans, right? So it was brokered by these 3 parties. There were all sorts of versions of this deal that were doing the rounds, and there were all sorts of rumors about what the deal may or may not include. who may or may not be included in it. And last night, a deal was presented to the Israeli cabinet. Okay, the main highlights, and there's other parts to it as well. But the main, I'd say, like the main parts of the deal, which has been agreed, is that 50 Israeli women and children are going to be released. This is all meant to, by the way, start tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Will it be 10 o'clock tomorrow? I'm not a prophet. We don't know. But the goal is that tomorrow, 50 Israeli women and children are going to be released. That will be the first stage. And it's going to be a 4-day ceasefire. So each day there's going to be somewhere between like 10, 12, 13 people. Each day of the ceasefire, there's going to be another group of women and children who are going to be released. One of the things that Israel insisted on was that if there's more than one child from a family, they get released together with the mother, right? There's like, as far as Israel is concerned, to have one mother and one child and leave another child behind doesn't do anything for that family. So they said it has to be in groups. Yeah, Brandon, you had a question or a comment.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions in my mind, but the central, I think, is Hamas start with negotiate with us with we capture the commander of Hamas in those days. So my question is why we keep negotiate with Hamas, because Hamas is always win the negotiate with us, because do you so do you know when we flew the soldier and we free, free just one soldier, and Hamas and the state of Israel free 200 of Palestinians. So for me, Israel doesn't have to negotiate with Hamas. And the other is what is the main goal, if destroy Hamas or release the kidnapped?
Okay, so we'll start back. We'll start with the second point you raised. At this point, it depends who you ask. I think there's definitely been a shift in the immediate days after October 7th. The way that when we did get feedback from the government or insights from the government, it was, we're going to destroy Hamas. We're going to destroy Hamas. And then after a few days, it was like, oh yeah, and we're going to get the hostages back as well. And slowly, the hostages have become, it seems to be more of a priority. Because it's been a popular, right? The country is demanding it. The country wants it desperately. And also, like I said, it's tangible. It's something you can actually see, right? Whereas it's hard to know how to define the ending of Hamas. Now, when you were talking about prisoner exchanges, yes, that's one of the concerns here. Now, the Gilad Shalit deal. Gilad Shalit was an Israeli soldier that was kidnapped in 2006. He was serving along the Gaza border. He was kidnapped, and
Thank you thank you for clearing.
yeah, Gilad Shalit. So he was released in 2011. So he was, after 5 years in captivity, he was released. Israel got Gilad Shalit back. The Palestinians got over 1,000 prisoners released, including prisoners who had blood on their hands, who've been responsible for the deaths of Israelis. It was these are not simple issues, right? There's obviously many complicated ideas of this. And one of the people who was released as part of the Shalit deal was actually the head of Hamas in Gaza. So it's something to think about. Okay, so these I hope that helps you, Brandon. These 50 children and women are supposed to be released over the course of a 4-day ceasefire. In exchange, Palestinian prisoners who do not have blood on their hands, as far as we've been informed, but are women, and they're being called children, but they're not children. They're like old teenagers. They're not like 7-year-olds like they have captured from us. But they're teen and women Palestinian prisoners who are in prison. That's why they're prisoners. But they've been involved in terrorist activity. They haven't killed anyone, but they've been involved in terrorist activity. They're going to be released, and then also trucks of fuel and aid are going to be allowed into Gaza. This is also something which has caused a lot of controversy, because the idea of the fuel being allowed in, for example, the fuel generally speaking, has not made its way to the people that need it, to the civilians and the hospitals and those things. But Hamas steals it, and then they use it for their own needs, their own for their own purposes, including firing rockets, right, and all these other things, and to power their network of tunnels and all the other things they use them for. So it's become it's become a controversy. Okay, so that's what the deal broadly looks like, right? 50 Israeli women and children to be released, 4-day ceasefire, teen and women Palestinian prisoners to be released, and the fuel and the aid to come into Gaza. Now, the idea also is that after the initial 4 days, there's a period when each day it can be extended by another day in exchange for another 10 hostages, right? So you have the hostages another 10 days, and if you get another 10 hostages released, there'll be another day of ceasefire. Another 10 hostages, another day of ceasefire. That's the goal, right? That's what we're talking about here. So now, yesterday in the Knesset, in the cabinet, excuse me, in the government, this is also another discussion for another time, but for some reason, Israel has 38 cabinet members. That might be another interesting series that Benji and Andrew can put together. But the 38 cabinet members, and there was a vote, and the vote passed from 35 to 3, right? So the vast majority of the cabinet agreed to it, right? But I was thinking, and I've been talking to a lot of people about this, what are the pros and cons of that deal, right? What are the pros and cons of the deal? And yes, it's a very, very hard conversation to have, right? It's a sensitive issue. Like I told you, I saw the families of the hostages, right? This is not a conversation I would want to be having with them. It's a horrific conversation to be having, that we should never ever have to have this conversation again. But the reason I'm bringing it up is because this is the conversation which is happening in every cafe in Israel today. This is a conversation which on every train ride is happening in Israel, every workplace that the soldiers are having, that the kids in school are having amongst themselves with their teachers. This is the conversation in Israel today, right? What are the pros? What are the cons? Were they right to pass it? Were they not right to pass it? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop that particular share, okay? And now I'm going to reshare. And this time, that's how this works. Okay. Okay, it's working okay? Yeah, you guys can see? Great, okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right, so now I'm going to put here pros. And then I'm going to put here. Oh, no, it changes all the color. Okay, hang on. So we'll do it in 2 different colors. Let's do like this. And then we'll do, see, I'm trying to do a good job educationally, but it's a little hard to do with the colors, but let's try. Okay.
You got it.
Yeah, it worked. All right, awesome. All right, thank you. And then cons. Okay. And what I'm going to ask you now to do is to either put in the chat, and Andrew will help me with that because I'm not sure I can see the chat entirely. Oops, why is it not letting me do that here? Hang on. What are the pros? What are the cons? Let's either put them in the chat or just yell them out.
Daniel said cons more resources for Hamas.
Okay. Then that's a con, yeah? So we would call that a okay. Resources for Hamas. For sure. That's something which people are very concerned about. Okay. Next one. Somebody else.
I think if we can negotiating with Hamas, Hamas will make not a massacre, but kidnappings again from Gaza to Gaza. So it's hard to keep negotiating, and we always give more people than they. So we will give they 50 people, and they give us we give 150 people, they give us 50. So it's unfair.
Okay. Um,
Sorry for my English. I'm learning here in Israel, so it's complicated, but
English is great.
thank you.
it's where are you from, Brandon?
I'm from Argentina.
Okay, so your English is better than my Spanish, so we're doing well. Okay, unequal, um, unequal results, I guess you call it, right? Isn't it? I don't know if that's the right thing for it. Okay,
Yeah.
okay, and then okay, does that what else can we think of here?
Are we only doing cons?
We're doing both.
I would say a pro is children held hostage being returned safely. The pro.
Yeah.
And I guess on the cons, you're allowing for the movement and activity of Hamas to continue over the next 4 days without IDF being able to continue to move forward.
Right. So it's kind of it stops the momentum, right? Is that what you're saying, or it's more than that?
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's a huge part of it. Plus, I mean, any kind of I guess like I would stick with that. Yeah, stopping momentum, but just also allowing them to, I guess, fortify anything that they need to, against any IDF movement that would go forward.
Right. So those are two. I'd say that two sides of the same coin, maybe, right? But they are different, right? They're definitely different, right? Like they're
Yeah.
okay, great. Okay, thank you for that, Nate. Okay, and Hannah says one pro is that the Western world. Okay, so would you call that PR? Is that what you would call that? Oh, is Hannah there? Yeah, so I guess we would call it some sort of like it's PR, right? It's for sure PR, in that sense that the world gets to see that Israel does important things. I think I would also add to that though that it's also important because the people of Israel get to see, right? That the country, that the government actually cares about them. Like what a terrible feeling to think that God forbid it happens again, and you say, oh, the government didn't do anything, they didn't care about us, right? Like it's so I guess it's like PR at home and it's also PR PR at home and PR abroad, right?
Yeah, national support.
As this one or as a separate one, you would say?
No, I'm agreeing. The PR at home is just increased support from the citizens to continue with the war.
Right, because there's hundreds of thousands of people now who are in reserve duty. Unfortunately, we've had too many funerals for soldiers, right? Businesses are closing down because there's no one to work in the businesses, and there's no one to be customers in the business. And it gets tiring, right? And it gets hard, and people. It's important to keep the morale, and important to see a goal for this, right? Like to see what is this worth it? So I think you're right there, right? Like it keeps the morale going and gives people a sense of yes, we're achieving something. There's something achievable that's happening here, right?
Agreed.
Okay, and Hanlo, you've added the restoration of hope. Yeah, I mean, it's been pretty depressing. I don't know how many of you are joining us from Israel and how many of you are joining us from overseas, but Israel's been a very, very sad place to be. for the last few weeks. Like really, like very sad. So hope would be nice. Okay. Any other pros and cons? I have a couple I can add if people feel like they're done, but I'd be more interested in hearing what you have to say than. Okay, so I'm going to add a couple, and again, if people have more, please feel free to stop me. Okay, like but I think another important one that we have to acknowledge here is a sense of it's the moral thing to do, right? As Benji was saying, like we just want to get the kids home, right? Like, and that's I think that's part of morality, right? But it's also connected to Jewish values. Now, there's an idea in Judaism or in Jewish text of releasing the prisoners. It's a very strong value, being written about throughout the centuries in Jewish texts. And it's important, right, that we live our lives according to the value of the state. And one of the values of our state is that we want it to be an expression of our Jewish culture, and part of our Jewish culture is our values, right? So I think that's part of it. Okay, Daniel's added again. It gives Hamas some authority. Absolutely, right? Like this has given Hamas. It's like winning the World Cup for Hamas. This, right? Like I mean, it's really given them, or the World Series, depending on where people are joining us from. But it's really given a huge boost to Hamas, and it will continue to do so, right? Like, wow, look what we managed to get out of Israel. We managed to get this out of them, right? The other thing that people are worried about, and I think with some justification, is that it sets a precedent, right? It sets a precedent that Hamas see that they can get a lot out of this, and they decide sometime in the future, oh, we need more supplies or we need more something. Oh, we've got a good way of doing it. We'll go kidnap some more Israelis, right? Like because they see that it gives them something. So that's a con for the deal. Another con is also you're releasing dangerous people, right? I mean, we're not talking about people who are we're not talking about people who are particularly pleasant people that we want walking around our streets, right? And we're also talking about people who, I mean, they won't be on our streets, but the idea being that in some time in the future they could perpetrate more terror attacks, right? Nobody wants these sorts of people out. So these are some of the cons. Another one, by the way, which I thought was an interesting one, is some people have suggested that if you bring home only a partial group, then the pressure comes off and there's a danger of leaving behind some of the other people. Now, I would like to think that that's not going to happen, but there's, right, the people are concerned that if you get like the children home and some of the women, whatever, okay, we got some, right? We got 50 out of 240. So that's something. And of course that doesn't, right? That should not work out like that, but that's what some people are concerned about. So here we have some of the cons. I would say another important pro of why, and I think this is one of the reasons why the government approved this, is because it's about seizing the moment, right? Like we don't know when, did I spell that right? No, I don't think I did. We don't know when another opportunity will come up, right? There's been talks of deals for weeks, but this is the first deal that was really went somewhere, right? But really, really went somewhere. And people said, you take what you can get at this point, right? You want to bring these kids home. You want to make sure that the country is behind and united behind the goal of this. Let's do it now. Let's take the moment. Let's seize the moment for now. And what will be in the future, we'll deal with. But we need to take this. That's an important one. And I also think another one, and maybe this was again similar to what Benji was suggesting before, but this idea of the families, right? When I saw these families at this march, I told you it broke my heart. It was absolutely heartbreaking beyond. Who's going to say to them no? right? Like it's just something we cannot do, right? As a country. And yes, the things that you said about the cons, the resources for Hamas for sure. This is Hamas's dream come true, that Israel's stopping the momentum. It could potentially be dangerous for our soldiers. It gives a chance for Hamas to fortify, right? All the things that you mentioned, absolutely, right? And I don't think anybody is disagreeing with those things, right? Everybody says, yeah, absolutely. And that's the reason why this is a conversation which everybody's having, because it's a very, very hard conversation. We recognize what we're giving up. We're recognizing what we're sacrificing. But ultimately, those things we see in the blue, those are the ones which drive us as a people, as a country, right? Those are the things which the government prioritized. And I honestly, I haven't seen any research that's been done. It would have to be done very quickly about the popular opinion about whether this was the right thing or the wrong thing. But I would say that even though it's very difficult, at least the people I've spoken to, and maybe I'm in my little echo chamber, I don't know, but the people I've spoken to absolutely say this has to be done. It sucks. It's terrible. We're paying a high price, but ultimately we've got to get these kids home. We've got to start somewhere. We have to seize the moment. We have a moral and Jewish obligation to do it. This is what our country is about protecting each other, coming together, and we can't let that opportunity pass. So, does anybody have any follow-up questions or comments on any of this? Okay, so I'll wrap it up, and I'll say thank you for everybody for joining us tonight, and thank you for your participation. I hope nobody minds, but I'm actually going to screenshot this list because I think it's a good list that you came up with, and I'm going to use it in other forums. If anybody has any thoughts or questions afterwards that occurs to them later that they want to ask me about, Andrew has my email, so you can feel free to reach out to Andrew, and he'll pass on my email or my. If you're in that WhatsApp group, then I'm in there as well. My phone number is in there as well. And yeah, I hope you found this useful to get an insight into what all of us in Israel are thinking about and talking about right now.
Matthew, thank you. Also thinking about the list, like